Welcome back to Filling in the History. I'm the amateur historian. Here, going to be talking about a couple of interesting things today. It's going to be a shorter episode. We're going to be talking about section 29 of the Doctrine and Covenants, which is, I believe, the longest to this point revelation that we get in the Doctrine and Covenants narrative. And because that's really the only thing, there's not a lot that comes before this or after it. In fact, the thing that comes after this is actually section 28, which we talked about in the previous episode. It's kind of out of order in the Revelation books. Um, but this revelation actually talks a lot about things that are revealed in what we now call the Joseph Smith translation of the Bible, and more specifically, something that we call the Vision of Moses, or today we call it the Book of Moses in the Pearl of Great Price. So, because they're bringing that up, in my infinite wisdom, I thought that I would, you know, basically tell you the story of the Joseph Smith translation. So yeah, might have bit off more than I should chew today, but it's okay. It's going to be all right. We're going to be okay. So let's light right into it. And thank you again for sticking with it. I hope you're enjoying these things. I've been sort of modifying the production of this with various tools that I've been receiving, and so I'm hoping every week it gets a little better as I learn how to do this right, because I am the amateur historian. Emphasis on amateur. Anyway, so part 1 is going to be section 29 of the Doctrine and Covenants, and the earliest copy we get of this is in Revelation book 1. It is actually called the 29th commandment. So in a rare moment, current and former actually line up. It actually takes up 5 pages of manuscript, and so bit of a lengthy revelation for its time. Handwriting of John Whitmer with a lot of corrections by Sidney Rigdon and Oliver Cowdery. So if you're looking at the originals of this, you're going to see a lot of strike-throughs and a couple of changes and things like that. And as I said before, this one actually, it's section 29, and then for the next revelation, it's actually section 28. So we've already done that, so we're just going to kind of press forward with the order that we currently have. And something that we get in here that I thought would be kind of interesting, talking about the papers themselves. I'm just going to take you to kind of a moment of how our books printed back in the day. And I get the feeling something very similar happens in today's publications. We're going to focus on this right here. This is called a take mark. So footnote 52 from the facsimile edition, this is Revelation Book 1, facsimile edition says, the editing mark around may naturally is a take mark. It indicates the final words of the second gathering, or B signature, of the Book of Commandments on page 64. May naturally is the end of the gathering, and you can see a gathering mark on the following page. So as you can see here in the actual publication of the Book of Commandments in 1833, pages were printed in a very large sheet, kind of in different orientations. They were folded, they were cut and bound, and the direction of the pages was different based on its orientation when the gathering was printed. So basically, this take mark is saying, okay, that's enough for this gathering. You're going to print that sheet over and over and over again, and then you're going to dry it, and then eventually going to fold it, paginate it, and cut it up and bind it. So that's how the gatherings work. So a little bit about how to print a take mark. So you see that little bracket there. It is chapter 29 in the Book of Commandments, and the actual take mark, if you will, is not found, but you can see on the bottom of page 65 here is where that mark is, and may naturally is found on the end of the previous page. So that's just a little bit about how they printed it. So it's kind of fun to see those things in action. It is section 10 in the 1835 Doctrine and Covenants. And there is no difference between 1981 and the 2013 section headings besides the removal of the history of the church reference. So a little bit about the papers itself, the paper itself, the paper gathering itself, and a little bit about take marks, because I know you were dying to understand what that was. Anyway, so circumstantial introduction to this. Revelation Book 1 actually gives for it a rather lengthy introduction to a revelation. It says, quote, a revelation to 6 elders of the church and 3 members. They understood from Holy Writ that the time had come that the people of God should see eye to eye, and they seeing somewhat different upon the death of Adam, that is his transgression. Therefore they made it a subject of prayer and inquired of the Lord, and thus came the word of the Lord through Joseph the seer, saying or given at Fayette, Seneca County, state of New York. So we get very short explanations out of the Book of Commandments and the Doctrine and Covenants, and even in the Evening and Morning Stars is basically revelation given to six elders. But a couple of questions that they were apparently asking here is some clarification about what happened when Adam fell, or what could be called his spiritual death, as we call it today. Um, in the manuscript history, all you get from draft 2 and the published volume 1 is just revelation given in the presence of six elders in Fayette, New York, September of 1830. Not a whole lot to go along with there. So what we really get out of this is from Documents Volume 1. From the historical introduction, we get the heading from Revelation Book 1 seems to indicate, then, that this small group, believing that the Book of Mormon prophecy about Zion would soon be fulfilled, therefore inquired of the Lord, and thus came the word of the Lord through Joseph the seer. You kind of get what you get in this case. Not a whole lot of further detail here. We do get a little bit into the content of the revelation. Usually I do this sort of thing, but the historical introduction here actually does a really good job of this. Um, so it says, the revelation affirmed the imminent advent of the millennium and declared that members of the Church of Christ were called to help gather God's people before the great event. Then it turned to the creation of the world and the nature of Adam's fall, subjects Joseph Smith had recently taken up in his Bible revision. According to the heading, the small group had differing views about what they call, quote, the death of Adam, that is his transgression. Near the end of the text, the revelation addressed the question of whether God's commandment to Adam to not partake of the forbidden fruit was spiritual or temporal by declaring, quote, all things unto me are spiritual, and not at any time have I given unto you a law which was temporal, neither any man, nor the children of men, neither Adam your father, whom I created. Thus Adam's temporal act of eating the forbidden fruit rendered him spiritually dead. And footnote 13 to this says the foregoing prophecies about the fate of the wicked do not match any known text from Ezekiel. So in the midst of this revelation, it talks about this, like what happened with Adam, and then it talks about Ezekiel's prophecies, and what he wrote here does not match that. So there is, and that's something I appreciate about the Joseph Smith papers. They're like, yeah, you said it, and that's not what happened, or that's not how it was. So, there you go. Some precursors to later doctrinal foundations of the church that I found interesting was that Jesus was going to come to his temple. So not a whole lot of talk about temples, but there was a lot of talk about the New Jerusalem, about Zion, and that there would be a temple built there. That definitely is a precursor to the importance of temple building. So the first house of the Lord that we get, as it was called, is in Kirtland, Ohio. The second one that we get is Nauvoo, Illinois. And then after that, um, basically it kind of stops until they get to Salt Lake Valley. And then, of course, you have temples all over the place here. But that was precursed here in this revelation. So I thought that was interesting. That was the first time it was mentioned. The next thing we get is talking about a person's age of accountability, which was actually there's many years that happen. Well, not many years, but like there's several years that pass before we start talking about the age of accountability for a person. So if you're not aware, there's actually no such thing as being born a Latter-day Saint. You can obviously be part of a family and be on the records of the church as a child of a Latter-day Saint family, but you are not allowed to be baptized before the age of accountability, which we have identified in the Doctrine and Covenants as age 8. So it's great to be 8, as we all know. So, um, you're not an automatic member of the church. You are a child of record, and so just kind of keeping track of the family is part of it. But you are not automatically just put in. We believe it's something that you need to have at least accountability in order to do it. And we believe the minimum age for that is 8. So that is the first time we kind of hear about that. Of course, it doesn't give the age of accountability, but that's what it is. So And the quote for this is, "But behold, I say unto you that little children are redeemed from the foundation of the world, through mine only begotten, wherefore they cannot sin, for power is not given to Satan to tempt little children, until they begin to be accountable before me." Again, 8 years old. Uh, Footnote 26 also is talking, and this is a little harsh, but just so you can kind of understand the full context of things. The Book of Mormon also strongly condemned infant baptism, teaching that young children are incapable of committing sin and that Christ's atonement redeems them all. This is a very forceful statement towards the end of the Book of Mormon, and this is found in footnote 26 of the document series. And that's all that I've mined out of this, quite frankly. So a lot of things, again, about the creation, about the fall of Adam, about the nature of God's commandments, again, very often quoted actually about how, we're not, even if it's talking about word of wisdom or, taking care of your body, that's not a temporal, it's actually a spiritual commandment. Everything's spiritual to God. That's something that's held very strongly by members of the church. And then again, you get precursors to things like the temple and the age of accountability, which we now know is 8 years old. So having said all of that, that's part one, talking about section 29 and all the things going along with that. Stay tuned for part two. We're going to get into the actual Joseph Smith translation of the Bible and a bit of its history and its current usage in the church today, as well as in other churches.